Welcome to another ReThink Ready conversation. This time we're talking about veterans and the workforce. We'll talk about why it's good business for your company to be hiring veterans, how to make their transition back into civilian life as smooth as possible, and how it can help our economy get on its feet again in this post-pandemic recovery. Joining me now are Carol Eggert from Comcast NBC Universal, the Senior Vice President of Military and Veterans, Ivan Denton, U.S. Department of Labor, the Director of Programs, Benny Anderson of Duke Energy Company, who's the lead for Enterprise Military and Veterans, and Sarah Roberts from LinkedIn, the Head of Military and Veterans Programs. So before we get started, just to try to set the table a little bit about the community that we're really focused on, the veterans here, I just wanted to play a quick video. So let's go ahead and listen.
The night of June 14, 2007, I was injured in Iraq while on combat operations. My vehicle struck and activated a pressure plate IED. And after I got out of the vehicle, I became aware that I was an amputee on my left leg. My immediate doubts and questions afterwards were, what kind of life could I have? The hardest part of this has honestly been unrealized dreams. I wanted to go into law enforcement, which I can't. And the inability to realize that dream is difficult to deal with. With my military background and kind of being a self-starter, I had goals right away of getting healed up, getting back, setting an achievable goal, and then going after it. I'm proud to say that I took my first steps in both prosthetics 2 months to the date of my injury. I've been walking ever since. People may see me and have an idea of what I can and can't do, and I love that my legs can help describe me, but they don't define me.
You have 200,000 individuals leaving the military every year. And there's a lot of transition service members don't know what they want to do and want to have a complete career change. But when you get out, you have to create a new identity or find a new identity. You have to find your purpose in life. And then you have to define, what do I want to do?
My name is John Pomelo. I'm 30 years old, and I'm a Staff Sergeant in the United States Army. So some of the biggest challenges transitioning out of the military into civilian life is my expectation management. I fully expected to serve 20 years in the United States Army. When I first found out that due to medical issues, I wasn't going to make it to 20 years, it was a big blow. Our oldest, Aaliyah, was born with a heart defect where she was born with just half of a heart. She ended up getting a heart transplant when she was 2 months old. The insurance for the Army, that's been kind of key for us to stay in, so getting out of the military, it scared us a little bit. The immediate thoughts after that for my wife and I are, where are we going to live? Where am I going to work?
I believe there's many stigmas around veterans, but the biggest is probably that every veteran is broken or has some ailment preventing them from being amazing.
Veterans have a lot to offer you and your business, your enterprise. So don't throw us away because of the baggage that we may carry, because you're throwing away traits and skills that you won't find anywhere else.
Ivan, let me start with you. I heard one number in there, but 200,000 veterans leave the military every year. How large is this potential workforce that we should be tapping into?
Well, not only is the active component 200,000, which is just an unbelievable, talented workforce that our employers can tap into, but we've got the reserve component, which is 808,000 strong as well. So when you take the 1.2 million that serve active and the 800,000, that's a large number. And a lot of our reservists and guardsmen need help as well. But obviously, TAP has been in the forefront of Congress, and TAP is a lot better than what it was when we started in 2011. And we're excited to continue to improve TAP every year that I've been here, and I've been here 4.5 years.
And for those who don't know, and I know the military is full of jargon, but what does TAP stand for? And also from that, what kinds of programs exist to help members in this transition?
Yeah, so the Transition Assistance Program really came about, and a lot of money was spent on it when the recession hit in 2010. And unemployment was around 10%. It was higher than that for non-veterans, but around 10% for veterans. So a lot of energy went into the transition assistance program by not only the Department of Defense, but Department of Labor for Employment. And then Veteran Affairs, as you know, does the benefits side. So when you really look at those three interagency partners, TAP became kind of a requirement for all those exiting the service in 2011. Let me just highlight two areas that I think the average veteran would like to hear about, the average transitioning service member, and our employers. There's a program called DoD Skill Bridge, and when I transitioned in 2016, it was only a 1,000 or two that took part in DoD Skill Bridge. Last year, 14,000 participants were able to work with U.S. employers for a DoD Skill Bridge opportunity. And what DoD Skill Bridge is where an employer can basically let you try them out. The last 6 months they're serving, they get paid by their service to come to you and work for you, and you can kind of get to know them, they can get to know you. And a lot of these are high-based skills training as well. So DoD Skill Bridge is changing how service members navigate TAP. It's changing how U.S. employers now have access to this talented manpower pool as well. So again, somebody might say, well, 14,000 out of 200,000, what happens to the rest of them? Well, I would tell you that a lot will go to college, to the higher education. So, you know, that number 14, we know it's going to get much larger in the coming half decade. And we're working with the Department of Defense to continue to improve that.
Something to add to that, Ivan and I have spoken about this several times. SkillBridge has improved and continuing to improve, but one gap that we need to address is bringing in private sector employers. Now, we're lucky enough, Bernie, me, we're military, we're running a department, but think of all those companies that don't understand DOD or DOL for that matter. We need to help the employers understand how to best use SkillBridge.
Benny, I know you've got some experience recruiting for the military, but if you were able to come up with the elevator pitch for other employers on why they should be recruiting veterans, what would that be?
Well, really, I look at it from the lens of, one, the benefit and training that the veterans and transition service members will bring to the organization. I would tell them to start with that vested relationship with the local installation that they may have that's close by in their particular footprint, and really having the opportunity to get to know what some of the skills and experiences that some of the service members have. Because it is my belief that a lot of the employers really don't know how those transferable skills can connect to industry. So I would really tell them to start with there so they can begin to really understand that. And once they gain the understand and the knowledge of the skills and experience that's out there, they can then build upon and really create a really active veteran recruiting program for their organization.
So Carol, how do you translate a military resume into figuring out that, you know what, leading a platoon in a pretty sticky situation has a whole bunch of skills that might not be officially what we're looking for on a college transcript, but this is someone who can certainly do the job and is qualified?
You're exactly right, and I think that's a two-sided issue. The employer and the hiring managers and the recruiters need to understand the military, because no matter how much you sanitize that resume and try to make it civilian, you're eventually going to talk about your military experience. So it's important that the HR community makes an effort to understand the military community. We partnered with the Society for Human Resource Management to create a program, a Veterans at Work certificate program that HR professionals can take, which does exactly that, help them better understand how to interview military talent. Now, on the other side of that, we've seen it many times where our military transitioning service members don't take the time to understand the companies they're going to. I've gotten calls that said, hey, tell me how best I might fit with Comcast. Now, I'm pretty darn busy and I'm not the one that's going to figure it out. You know, go to the website and let me know what you think. So there's issues on both sides of that. And I think many organizations are working to fix that.
Sarah, you're at LinkedIn now, but in previous incarnations, you helped Microsoft and Amazon figure out their military and veterans programs. So what are your tips to employers to address what we're just talking about now?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because oftentimes employers, rightfully so, solve for their own needs, but in doing so, they create opportunities that they feel veterans can easily pipeline into. And that in and of itself is great because it's offering them an opportunity, but I think it exasperates stereotypes that military members can only do certain things. So they can only go into DoD contracting, they can only go into roles that are operations focused or supply chain focused. And I think that's great, but what it does is it sort of closes the aperture in terms of what's possible for a transitioning service member. So maybe I have a set of skills that translate to maybe a role in marketing. How is it that, I'll look at a college grad who has no skills or experience for an entry-level marketing role, and yet I won't consider a military member because there's stereotypes that are associated with their service. So my recommendation is for employers to really consider all opportunities for military members, not just the ones that they think are for military members. And that's probably one of the biggest needs that I think is important as we start to think of, reskilling the workforce. And, there's more people that there will be a pipeline of people that continue to transition out. And so keeping those opportunities open and accessible is so important.
Sarah, staying with you for a second, there are oftentimes people who are in support of that veteran saying, yeah, okay, you've been out of the workforce for a little while conventionally because you've been overseas, and you've got to brush up your resume on LinkedIn. We've got to figure out how to translate these skills into something employers are looking for. So what's your tip to veterans or their spouses, caregivers, support network to kind of make a veteran the most appealing and presentable as possible to employers?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say first, don't shy away from your experience. There is just such a tremendous amount of skills and experience and resilience that come as a result of your military service. But one of the things I love about LinkedIn just in general is this opportunity to research. And so you can research different people who have transitioned, different companies, different opportunities. And so I think it's really important for the service member to lean into that research and use what they learn around and in the industry from other people who have transitioned as a complement to add to their own resume or profile so that they can sort of start to do the crosswalk themselves and not just rely on the recruiter or the employer to do it. I think there's also, to Carol's earlier point around this huge amount of education that still needs to continue to happen with the gatekeepers who are hiring managers and recruiters to really see that potential. The other piece that I would highlight is we had done some research in 2019, and it really shines light on the confidence that military members should have. So when we looked at the data on LinkedIn around the 3 million military members, we compared them to non-veterans. They get promoted faster. They have more education. They have more skills and experience. They are doing all of these great things. They're staying at a company longer. So those are all things that should really help service members feel confident that they have skills, they have experience, and they will do great when they transition. It's just sort of a bumpy first step as they think about how to navigate that.
Ivan, who are we leaving on the sideline? And what's the cost of the untapped potential of the folks whose skills we're not harnessing into the economy?
Our research told us that the number one challenge and fear that service members had is they didn't know what they wanted to do when they were going to transition. Not that they couldn't do it, they didn't even know what they wanted to do. So what we've done at 13 military installations, and again, TAP has taught at over 200, but at 13 military installations, we've hired 54 employment navigators at these 13 sites to come alongside these service members their last year to really help them do career exploration. Because what we're finding is a lot of service members don't know how to do career exploration, and we teach it in the curriculum, but it's one thing to have somebody help you with the skills assessment test and to kind of, give you a little bit of hand-holding, because we do want service members to own their transition, but it's nice when there's somebody that can come alongside them and help them. So that's the first part of what our 54 navigators do at 13 sites. Then we've got 9 partners, non-government, and I'll give you some of the names of the big ones, Hire Heroes USA, Vet Jobs. LinkedIn will be in our second batch. You've all heard of Helmets to Heart. It's just a rock star organization. These entities themselves place about 20,000 a year. Veterans, Guardsmen, and Reservists. So we're going to pass these service members to these rock star organizations.
Sure. Carol and Benny, I want to ask you, and I'll start with you, Carol. Well, how does an employer create that infrastructure where there might be different needs for a veteran coming in, whether it's a support network within your company, mentors, people who kind of know the ropes, and people who have actually just kind of lived in their shoes and can help them navigate just the life challenges that might be happening? Because working at an office space or a warehouse might be very different than what they've experienced for years. Carol?
So, Hari, you're exactly right. Companies need to think about that. One thing we're saying right here is veterans need this, veterans need that. The first thing you need to realize is all veterans can't be put in one pot. It could be somebody that's coming out after one tour of duty, after first job they ever had straight out of high school. You could have a mid-career person coming out as a captain after 12 years. Employers need to understand the landscape to recruit. And then they need to train their hiring managers to understand the military talent. But then, I think this is what you're getting at, they need to build retention programs. You can hire as many as you want, but if you don't retain them, you really didn't contribute to a solution. The most common retention programs involve exactly what you said, Hari. Mentorship, partnering or shadowing. VetNet, most companies have resource groups, employee resource groups, and their veterans resource group, we call ours VetNet, is usually one of the largest ones. And one thing we've pushed is that veterans belong to every ERG, every employee resource group. That's the one thing you need to stress. People said, well, if we hire all of these veterans, we're going to reduce our diversity numbers. Well, the military is more diverse than the general population, so we had to dispel that myth. So retention is critical, and you need to understand that it's a lot more than just getting them in the seat. You've got to keep them there, and that is to build that collaboration, that cohesion, that feeling that they belong.
Benny, what worked at Duke, what both on the recruitment and the retention side, and creating that scaffolding within the organization?
We look at it through the landscape, through the lens of recruiting, but retention is a huge piece. And I know Ivan can contest to this. There's a metric that's out there that if that veteran that you hire into your organization, your company, if he or she is really not feel that embrace or happy in what they're doing, they will leave that organization, their first job, within the first 1 to 2 years, right? So that is really a fact. So when I think about this, so the military service members, they're conditioned for their every move to have sponsorship once they move to an installation. That is ingrained in them everywhere they've been to on every assignment. So I kind of look at it from the perspective of onboarding. Companies and employers have to have a very vibrant onboarding program in order for that new hired veteran to feel a part of the organization, right? And it has to be structured. It has to be laid out, right? Because there has to be some realistic expectation of what's going to happen in your role for the next 1 to 5 years. Why do I say that? Because that's what the service member is used to. And then one of the pieces that Carol mentioned is really huge. The Infinity Group, the Employee Resource Group. This is where the new hired veteran is going to find that mentorship. That's also where he or she is also going to have their first opportunity to volunteer within the company and the organizations and leading a lot of different initiatives and committees within the organizations. A lot of these committees could lead to a leadership assignment. So now the veterans feel connected because he or she came in at the individual contributor level and maybe not at the manager or leader people level. So now they're in this employee resource group, and now they have an opportunity to serve in an officer leading the committee that's going to make an impact within the organization.
You know, Sarah, it kind of sounds like a dream for an employer in some ways. If your research says that they actually are more likely to stay connected to the same job for a number of years, and here's Benny saying, you know, they're used to 1 year, 4 year, 5 year commitments. That's, compared to sort of Silicon Valley culture where somebody gets a job and they're kind of already on the sly looking at their LinkedIn profile, seeing who's trying to recruit them for the next gig.
Yeah, I think that's really, and I think that's just one of the really awesome things about military members is just, there's this service mentality. And I think at least what we've seen in our data is that, yes, they do stay longer. And we oftentimes talk about how important it is to network externally to find a job, but it is just as important to network internally. So to the point that Carol and Benny had made about, the sense of belonging through the ERGs, it is so valuable for companies to invest in that retention model. And I think that, military members do a great job of embracing each other and supporting each other. And I've seen and felt that in my own internal ERG. And the other piece that I think the other folks have spoken about is this idea of intersectionality. Veterans oftentimes are a veteran, but they also might identify with another identity or dimension. And I think highlighting that this is such a rich, diverse community that is going to be a tremendous asset to your organization and bring diversity of thought and leadership is something that, we can continue to lean on. But I think that's a really awesome point in terms of our data is that they do stay longer.
Yeah, and diversity is just good for business, old-fashioned business for whichever way you slice it. Ivan, I want to ask about a group that you're familiar with. You've come through the Army and the National Guard. The National Guard are not deployed full-time often. They are still members of our community more often than not, right? So is there anything that employers should be looking for when it comes to this group in the military?
Yeah, so Hari, that's an unbelievable question. What I would, again, I've been doing this for 4.5 years now, so what I would say to industry that don't just think that TAP's the only way to be able to attract and maintain military talent. Because I promise you, if you're in a large city, you've got a pretty good sized reserve and guard component right there in your city. And it's not that difficult to find it. You can just, it's there. I mean, it's going to be obvious with the large armory. And I will tell you that there's nothing wrong with an employer. As a matter of fact, we had this conversation. Should there be some sort of a reserve component skill bridge? And I will tell you, it's going to take a lot of smart people to kind of be thinking through this. But I would just say to employers, if you really want to hire guardsmen and reservists, you might want to kind of think locally to where you're trying to hire to.
Yeah, Carol, that actually seems like another bonus for an employer, somebody that is in the market that they want to serve and might have roots there, and that's the reason that they chose to call that home and be in the reserves.
Well, that's exactly right. We all say we want to represent the community that we serve as companies. So one way to do that is to employ your guard and reservist. There are some challenges for employers, especially I think last year was the highest op tempo of the Guard and Reserve due to the pandemic and civil unrest. So we need to support employers. Ivan, when you talk to your friends up there at DOD, I'd love to see some kind of tax incentive for those who hire Guard and Reservists. For instance, on my team, there's 3 Guard and Reservists, and 2 of them have deployed. And so you just lost them, and you have to somehow cover that lost labor. And so just ask employers to keep doing that because it's the patriotic thing to do. Granted, a big Comcast can do it, but a small independent business having, key employees leave for deployment like we did last year. So that's important. I also think we have to help employers understand the Guard and Reserve. When the Guard member says, I need to leave tomorrow because there's a hurricane in Florida, they need to understand you can't reschedule that. Well, I'm sorry, you can't go tomorrow, you're on the schedule. So much of it is understanding your Guard and Reservist, understanding USERRA, the laws that govern how you treat Guard and Reservists. ESGR, employer support of the Guard and Reserve. Any employer that wants to get involved, wants to better understand the Guard and Reserve, should reach out to their ESGR representative. They're all over, they're in the local areas, and they will connect you to your Guard and Reserve units. Really important resource.
That's a huge asset and resource. So I actually volunteer for ESGR on my own time, right? So as a member here in North Carolina, I wanted to find a way to continue to serve. It just so happened that Duke Energy has a memorandum of a statement of understanding with ESGR as well. But So you have to think about the employees that do serve in the Guard and Reserve that work for the company as well. Because as Carol mentioned, they're a huge part of that population of the workforce. And the more that a company can understand of what the capabilities and the responsibilities they have, it makes for a better workforce. And also it works for a better pipeline on the front end, because now you have the opportunity and access to a wider and much broader a scope for a talent community perspective.
So I will tell you that not only does ESGR do a rock star job on the front end to be able to solve problems at the lowest level, but if it becomes a real issue, it pops up at the federal level. We do the investigation, and then we attempt to try to solve the problem, and we just call it conflict resolution, basically, where we resolve the case to the satisfaction of both the claimant and the employer. And our percentages of resolving the complaint are extremely high because most employers want to do the right thing.
So for employers, if you don't support your Guard and Reservists and tell them they can't serve, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to quit their Guard and Reserve job so that they can maintain a full-time job for their families. What does that do for our national security when we lose that force? So when I talk about employers being patriotic, there's one way you can do that to support our national security. You've got to support our Guard and Reservists because they're half of the total force, just about.
Ivan brought up a very valid point, because some of the programs that we're talking about that's available for the active component, transition service member, there's a gap that's there for the reserve and guard component when we talk about our transition assistance programs. So, it's great that you highlighted it, Ivan, and it's great that there's been conversations to talk about that, because there is definitely a need for the guard and reservists as they make their transition as well. And it's just not quite all the way there yet and get that full scope.
I also want to ask about Carol made the point earlier that not all veterans are in the same age demographic or race or ethnicity, et cetera. There might be at different points of life. And the older you get, the more likely it is that you might have a family member who you are taking along with you from one place to another. And now that person is also looking for a job, looking to figure out how to fit in. I don't know, if you've, as employers, Benny and Carol, if you're recruiters or if your people say, okay, look, we've got this great talented candidate here. They're also looking for a job for their partner, and that person could fit somewhere in here. I mean, we could kind of get a 2-for-1. And then I'm going to also ask you, Sarah, I don't know if you have any data about that of people that are kind of connecting their resumes when they start shopping in different markets, so to speak. So, Benny, let me start with you.
So the first thing that comes to mind, which was a huge demographic, is the military spouse, right? So that's an underrepresented population as the service member begins their transition out. So, and most times, often not, the military spouse moves, as we all know, every 2 to 4 years, accompanying their spouse to the next duty location. And many times, and I can speak this from personally, because their resume and their career looks a lot different from really the service member, right? So in the eyes of a recruiter, when you see a military spouse is changing roles every 2 to 4 years, from a recruiter or a hiring manager's perspective, that doesn't look very well, right? So how do you bridge that gap, and how do you talk to that, right? So really, you have to have programs, initiatives in place to really address that underrepresented population, and that is the military spouses.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's so much work to do in terms of, really amplifying the resilience of military spouses. As I think of this transition point, when you have two people that are now looking for opportunities, I think from an individual perspective, really doubling down to invest in that research. Looking at, what cities are hiring, what industries are hiring, where are there job openings or job opportunities, and using that information as a way to then start proactively engaging communities or connections in that area. So is there somebody I know there? Is there somebody maybe I served with? The military spouse community is strong. Is there another military spouse that, potentially resides in that geographical area? And so using all of those touch points as a way to gather information and start networking your way into an opportunity. I'm sure the employers on this call would agree with me, but we know through our research that most people find jobs through somebody in their network. network. And so we would be remiss if we didn't really lean on our military network. The military network is powerful, it is strong, it is tight. And one of the things that we can really double down on, both for spouses and military members, is to use that network to help us lean into that future opportunity. I wouldn't be where I am today if somebody hadn't reached back to pull me forward. And I think it's on all of us to do that for both our veterans and military spouses as they're looking at making that, huge transformational leap from active duty or whatever, military entity they're a part of into the corporate workforce.
Ivan, if you had a kind of some closing thoughts for veterans, military spouses, their support network that might be watching this, what would you want them to take away?
Well, Sarah, let me give you a shout out for your LinkedIn, because I think you still provide, I think the last year that somebody is transitioning, I think you give them the higher level service from LinkedIn. Is that still correct?
We do. We give all transitioning service members the 1 year of free LinkedIn Premium, as well as for military spouses during every transition they may face. So yes.
So Hari, what I would say to Sarah and anyone, all of our instructors teach LinkedIn, and it is unbelievable the networking that you can do. I can find a veteran in any city, in any industry on LinkedIn. Anybody transitioning, the network that got you your promotion on active duty is not the network that's going to get you a job when you transition. So what Sarah's saying is use that network, and it can be a veteran network outside, but it's going to be a different network than you're used to. So you really got to take a look at how you're going to network. And then I think the other thing, I always tell folks, own the process. DOL is not responsible for your transition. VA is not responsible for your transition. DOD is not responsible for your transition. You are. It's your life. Be proactive.
Carol, any kind of closing thoughts? I mean, are you optimistic? Is this getting better?
Well, I've been doing this since 2015. So yes, I've seen vast improvements, particularly with military spouses and military caregivers of wounded warriors. So the population has certainly grown that we understand of the military connected community. When I started, it was just about veterans, and people didn't even understand what a veteran was, much less talk about Guard and Reservists. So it's definitely getting better. But once again, it's two sides of a coin. Ivan just said what the service member needs to do, but employers have responsibility to understand the military connected community, understand their spouses have benefits that support them. For instance, when our military spouses have to move, if they're a spouse of a military member, we help them find a job in the new region. So you've got to understand why they're moving. They're not just leaving the job because they didn't like it. So employers have, the onus is on them to do everything they can to understand this complex community, and the resources are there. You've got SHRM, you've got the you've got Syracuse University does all sorts of work, Psych Armor, Hiring Our Heroes. They're out there, and it's not difficult to find them. So I would say to all employers, make the effort. And I always tell folks, reach out to me. I'll help any employer that's trying to figure out how to do this.
Sarah, any closing thoughts for you?
Yeah, I love everything that both Ivan and Carol have highlighted. I think the biggest thing is start early. If I have any piece of advice for a transitioning service member, because there are so many amazing resources, invest the time early to start planning on, what you want to do. Do some self-reflection, some self-exploration. What worked for the person sitting next to you isn't necessarily what is going to work for you and your family. And so by investing that time up front, it'll be easier to navigate in the long run. And then to all the employers out there, there is a talent filter. There's a filter to search for military members in our recruiter product. So you can find them on the platform. You can search their profiles. There are over 3 million of them on LinkedIn. And so that's a great place to start too if you want to start researching the types of skills and experience those service members have.
Benny, it sounds like we're kind of coming back into a circle here. One of the things that Ivan had mentioned is that, there's a lot of people that don't know what they want to do when they come out. And this is kind of at the core of the military. Is like, you got to have a mission. You have to understand what steps you have to get there. So what is your, if you could distill your thoughts for someone who's watching, what would it be?
Yeah, so just like Sarah mentioned, start early. But also, we're taught in the military, we don't go after any mission alone. Don't go at your transition alone. Seek out a mentor. Seek out a person or persons that has done this before you. Also know the industry, right? Know the industry in a geographical location that you have some interest of relocating to. But really, once you connect with that mentor, the mentor is going to really lead you to all of the resources that you may haven't received while you were in your transition assistant classes. And really have that opportunity to connect with your mentor, network in the community, right? Because that's going to be a huge part of your transition is networking in your local communities after hours, attending, working on your elevator speech and utilizing that. And then the last piece I would say is practice. Get involved in mock interviews. Many service members hasn't had an opportunity to do interviews in many, many years. But all of these organizations that we're talking about here today, they provide these resources for service members and military spouses to be able to do mock interviews. So they are prepared when they go to that first networking event. They have their networking card in hand. They have their elevator pitch, and now they're ready to engage.
All right. Benny Anderson of Duke Energy, Carol Eggert from Comcast NBC Universal, Ivan Denton from the U.S. Department of Labor, and Sarah Roberts from LinkedIn. Thank you so much for participating in this ReThink Ready conversation about connecting military families and households back to the workforce. Thank you all for joining us. This conversation was brought to you in part by the support from Comcast Military.